Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Four Lakes Church of Christ. You'll have to forgive my smoker voice this morning. I did not partake in a pack of Marlboros. In fact, I did something much worse for my health and much worse for my voice. I attended a Wisconsin football game. And in true fashion, they won, but in the most heart-wrenchingly anxious and stressful way possible. So we got to watch a whole extra quarter of overtime football. Whew. So I had to stop about at halftime. I was getting real excited and cheering for the boys, and then I had to stop and go, wait a minute, am I leading singing tomorrow? No. Okay, good. Here we go. But yeah. So all that to say, you have to forgive my gravelly tone this morning. All right, so as we get really close to the end of our study of gospel personages, we are now to Mary and Martha. Last week, we studied, mind blank on names, Thomas, and made the case against doubting Thomas, specifically for that poor adjective that always seems to follow around his name. And so this week, we're going to talk about Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha are two of the most recognizable followers of Jesus for various purposes, but due to the examples we're going to read this morning, we're going to get a look into almost two sides of the same coin of how people approached following Jesus. And so as we get into that today, I want to look at, there isn't necessarily one bad side of the coin and one good side of the coin, but as we see from Jesus' reactions, as we see from how they treat their time with Jesus, I want to see how there's two approaches and also kind of the change that is happening in real time as we're seeing the followers of Jesus interact with him and how they kind of carry themselves. So, if you want to be opening up your Bibles, we're going to start in the book of Luke. And we're going to be in Luke chapter 10. And once you get to Luke 10, we're going to be going down to verses 38 through 42. A fun little aside. As far as names go, Mary is one of the most commonly found names for, women at the time. And so much to the fact that sometimes it's kind of hard to differentiate which Mary we're talking about whenever it comes to followers of Jesus, because we have just named, like, throughout the Gospels, we have Mary, the mother of Jesus. We have Mary Magdalene, who is one of the followers and also one of the helpers of Jesus. And then we have Mary of Mary and Martha fame. We don't get any differentiation besides the fact that it's not Magdalene and it's not his mom. Usually they're found together. So that's how we kind of know that Mary is with Martha. And so if we start in our first reading there, if someone wants to read verses 38 through 42, Luke chapter 10.
As they were traveling along, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister called Mary who was seated at the Lord's feet listening to his word. But Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and she came to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving alone? Then tell her to help me." But the Lord answered and said to her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things, but only one thing is necessary, for Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her."
Okay. So, starting out, this is our first instance of seeing Mary and Martha. And it comes that Jesus enters a certain village and that Martha welcomed him into her house. So, right there, we see a setup of someone who willingly takes Jesus into their home, is wanting to house them, is wanting to have them as a part of that. And so we don't know necessarily, whenever it talks about when Martha was distracted with much serving, some of the different translations also say was distracted by much business. Some interpretations say that she might have literally just been cooking, might have been cleaning the house, getting things ready for people to be in the house. But also there is a very real interpretation where the words that the Greek and the Hebrew uses does not directly refer to necessarily housework or even cooking. The word that's used is much more commonly used when talking about actual business, handling of paperwork or planning things out. And so the nature of the whatever Martha's distracted by isn't even necessarily the most important part, but it's just an interesting little side of like, we don't know in particular what Martha was preparing, but the point of the matter is that Martha was distracted attending to whatever was going on, and Mary was at Jesus' feet, was listening to him, was learning. And Martha, who was much distracted, approached him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore, tell her to help me." At this point, culturally, this would have been a very acceptable mindset. This is very much like a very important person, a very important teacher has come into your home. It's the woman's job to prepare the house, to make sure that they are waited upon, and make sure that they have everything that they want or need. And so here, Martha is saying, Mary, hello, I need some help over here, and even turns to the teacher. It's like, okay, cool, the teacher will back me up on this. Teacher, can you tell my sister to please come help me? And what does Jesus say? Martha, he says her name twice. Martha, Martha, why are you worried and troubled about many things? He doesn't berate her. He doesn't jump on her case, as is, we're finding so many things here about how Jesus has asked things that are supposed to follow the cultural norm. They're supposed to follow the norm of what has been set before. Almost as if we've had an entire sermon series about why Jesus is different, why Jesus is better. Because Jesus doesn't immediately jump upon, yes, it is culturally appropriate for the woman to go and help her sister. He says, no, she has chosen what is good. Specifically, in his own words, but one thing is needed. Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her. Jesus sees the importance that Martha is conducting business, is doing her part to make sure that he is comfortable. But he also sees that there is another who is directly learning, who is listening. In all of Jesus says, those who know me know the Lord. Those who know me know the way. He oftentimes uses the phrase, those who come to me. Those who come to hear me. Here we see Mary has come to learn. And Jesus says, that which is the good part will not be taken away from her. It's no longer, the message that Jesus is giving is not for any one gender, is not for any one age, is not for any one walk of life. This is a great example of that. Jesus has put the importance not necessarily on who is learning, but who they're learning from. Because Jesus is the way. We just talked about that last week. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Thomas asked, how do we know the way? We haven't been shown. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And Jesus says, Martha, you're distracted by many things, but there's one thing that your sister has found, and that will not be taken away from her. Mary has found the way, and she wants to learn it. She is there at Jesus' feet, wanting to know the way. In the same way how we talk about Jesus' message is for all, it's Paul in the book of Galatians that says, for you are in, chapter 3, verses 26 and 27. For you are all sons and daughters of God through faith in Christ Jesus. Did I just scoop? Nope. For all of you who are baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to promise. We're no longer we're no longer setting a line at, you can only walk through those building doors if you are over this age. You can only come in these doors if you have Jewish descent. You can only come in that door if you're a man or a female. That's not the importance of Jesus' word. And Jesus wants that to be abundantly clear. He says, those who seek me out are free to learn. And that's the purpose of, again, if people get distracted, that's something that happens. But the important part is we have to focus on what is the most important. And that we don't berate the Marthas when life gets a lot, because that's a very real thing. That's a very human thing, is there is so much on a person's plate that sometimes it's hard to focus. It's hard to clear everything out because there's bills to pay. There's people who need responding to. There's calls that need to be made. There's emails that need to be sent. There's all this stuff. But what we have to realize is that just because we got distracted doesn't mean we're off the path and we're lost and we're hopeless. But we always have to remember to refocus and to find the feet of Jesus. Thankfully, we don't have to find his physical feet. He left us the Bible. And that no one is, there goes the word, woohoo. No one cannot learn the Bible. Any other thoughts about that? All right. Well, moving on to our next example then, we're going to go over to the book of John. John chapter 11. Then we're going to read two sections of John chapter 11. If someone wants to start out just in the first verse through the fifth verse.
Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So the sisters sent word to him, saying, Lord, behold, whom you love is sick. But when Jesus heard this, he said, the sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus.
All right, so here at the beginning of this chapter, we saw a different part of the story whenever we studied Thomas. We saw the lead up to Jesus and the apostles preparing to go and see Lazarus, who's now died. This is the beginning. This is the setup, was telling us who Lazarus was of Bethany. We also get confirmation that Bethany was the town where Mary and her sister Martha lived. And so those sisters sent word to him, Lord, the one whom you love is sick. We see that Mary and Martha and Lazarus, even though he's not mentioned in their first meeting there, and we don't even know if that's their first meeting, but that to be mentioned as such, Jesus, the one whom you love. And then in verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. There are very few people that are described as being ones that Jesus loved. Obviously, we know that Jesus' message was for everyone. He loved the entire world and died for their sins. But this is a very important distinction, because especially in the book of John, John described himself, not by name in his book, but by the apostle whom Jesus loved. It's almost like love was really important to John, huh? Because he wanted it to be clear, this was not just some person that Jesus had made acquaintanceship with and then had kind of moved on. This was not someone he shook their hand and then moved on. This was someone who Jesus shared a deep personal bond with. To the point of, it says that Jesus very much waited a while, mostly because of the glorification of God and the miracle he was about to perform, but because there were probably a lot of emotions that were sweeping through. Even, we know there's an afterlife. We know that if you follow the word of the Lord and go to heaven, then you'll go to heaven. But death is still hard. it takes some of that pain away to know if we follow the same way, we'll see them again someday. That doesn't make death any less hard. Letting someone go, saying goodbye to someone, is hard. Yeah.
It also shows the human part of Jesus. I mean, we think of him as God, God, God all the time, you know, but he came and became a human. He did have great powers in that because he was God. But he still had to be able to have those emotions that we have nowadays, or he would not be able to be the Savior that we have. So I think it really shows that his humanness.
Yeah. And that is what makes the story of Jesus even more confoundingly amazing, is that someone who felt human emotions, who felt grief, who felt not necessarily anger but zeal. You remember him driving the tax collectors and merchants out of the temple. Someone who very much felt fear, felt the disparity of being in a human body, and yet to follow through, to carry out the will of himself, of the Lord, his Father. Yeah. Human emotions make the perfection of Jesus that much more impressive. Yeah, excellent point. And so, yes. So then Jesus heard that Lazarus had died, and he says, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." A question that oftentimes Christians will get is, if God is so good and so perfect, why does he let bad things happen? And folks, that is a hard question. And I don't even know if I can give an answer to that right here and now. But there is a part of it that is, bad things happen so that good may abound. He doesn't cause the bad things to happen. God doesn't set things in motion for bad things to happen. But the way that the Lord combats Satan trying to get into our heads, trying to make us feel like God is the reason bad things happen, the way he combats that is by how we react, how we support those who have gone through the bad time. When someone has experienced loss, we can't just say, well, you know, this has actually happened so that God may be glorified. We can't just use that as a cure-all to people's woes. But it's how the person is remembered. It's how people push against awful, bad things happening in the world. It's how they send support. It's how they make sure that these bad things don't continue to happen. It's hard. It's so, so hard. Because Satan is good at his job. One of the most interesting quotes, and I don't even know who said it, but it's the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing you he doesn't exist. Because if Satan isn't around to take responsibility for the bad things that happen, where does our mind go next? That somehow God caused the bad thing. And that's exactly what he wants. Yeah.
Well, I think so many times I've heard people say, oh, I know how you feel.
Mm.
But the right words are, I know you must be feeling bad, because you never know exactly what that other person is feeling.
Yeah. Empathy is good, but ultimately, sometimes there isn't a correct answer to grieving. Sometimes what the person needs is support. Not trying to make them feel like, oh, your experience isn't special. Your experience, yeah, there are people who have gone through this before. That's not the kind of support people need.
What people need is to know that you are there and that Jesus is there. That no matter what happens, no matter what emotions they feel, what they're going through, that whatever you can do to help, you will do to help. Simply being there for when they're ready to talk, for when they're ready to let you know how they're feeling. So yeah. Wonderful point, yeah.
Grief is different for each and every one of us, and we can't tell another person how to grieve. And we can't say, I did it this way, so you should follow my example. Because for you, it may not be the right way.
It's very telling that in our attempt to quantify human emotion, we've come up with the 5 steps of grief. And yet, even though we've come up with the 5 steps of grief, not everyone goes through every single step of grief. And there's also a specific order that, yes, people will usually follow this path, and yet some people skip parts 3 and 4 entirely. Some people start at step 3. Even though we have all this study and all this knowledge about how the human brain works, we still can't consistently quantify how people deal with grief. We can identify certain ways, specific emotions and follow-throughs, but yeah, everyone deals with grief differently. And in that same way, we just have to be conscious about it. We have to make sure that the road that grief is leading these people isn't towards destruction, but also we have to make sure that we let them take that path of grief as long as it's not harmful to them. Because yeah, everyone has to go through a different kind of grief. Wonderful points. And so, continuing on through chapter 11, down to verse 17. We've gone through now Jesus and the apostles talking about, oh, when are we going to go? Should we go now? And then eventually Jesus says, cool, let's go. And Thomas says, all right, let's go and die with him, because right now there's a whole bunch of people that are very angry with Jesus. So here we go. And they're off. Hard cut to the next scene. Here we are. So if someone wants to read verses 17 through 27. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Folks, this is one of the biggest show of faiths in the Gospels. Not trying to take away from any other mentions of faith, but look at look at the progression of how Martha, walking up to someone whom she knows, who she clearly states could have kept her brother from dying. She first says to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Lots of people like to hard stop right there and say, Martha's so short-sighted. Martha didn't think that Jesus could perform miracles beyond the physical limitations of blah, 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 blah. Only because the verse stops there. But what does she say in the very next verse? But even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. The full sentence. There's not even a hard, end of parentheses in between. Now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. This is not Martha saying, you should have been here. You could have saved my brother. Martha knows Jesus is coming in. She knows that something amazing is about to happen. Because she says, whatever you ask of God, God will give you. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And here's the only time where maybe Martha misconstrues what Jesus means, but not in a way that is faithless, not in a way that is missing the point. Martha's first thought after hearing your brother will rise again is, yes, I know he will rise again on the resurrection day. She has taken what she's learned and is now directly applying it to her grief, to how she's dealing with the death of a loved one. Most people, whenever stories are told of Jesus' resurrecting people from the dead, he talks to the person, they say, oh, please, Lord, come and raise my relative from the dead. Come to my house and heal my son, daughter, niece, whatever it is. And then Jesus has, his talks further about, go, your son will be fine when you get back, those kind of things. But Martha hears your brother will rise again, and she says, yeah, I know, you told me. He's gonna, whenever you come back, she's got the full history now. Whenever the day of resurrection comes, yeah, my brother will rise again, as I hope to too, yeah.
Jesus was his friend before he passed away. It's almost like she's consoling Jesus at this time.
Yeah.
It's like, don't worry, I know you would have done what you could have if you were still alive, and it's okay, I know he's going to rise on the last day. And Jesus is like, no, wait a second here. I've got a little more for you.
Yep. Martha gets more than even she could even have hoped for. Because, yeah, she is taking comfort in the fact that, yes, I'll see my brother again whenever the time you have prophesied comes. And, again, yeah, Jesus doesn't, berate her for not getting the point he's trying to make. In fact, very much, she's speaking the words of the teacher back to the teacher. But from someone who used to teach, the moment where your students speak what you've taught back to you, that's not patronizing, that you're saying they're getting it. It's not just regurgitation, it's in there. I told them this, months or years or however long it was ago, and it's still in there. And they're using that, they're applying that directly. Jesus is probably feeling a lot of joy of here's someone who listened. Not just came, not just saw me and checked it off their bucket list and went away. This is someone who believes. This is someone who gets it. Yeah.
The same way it's when your kids repeat what you've said to them too. You think, wow, after all this time,
Yeah.
it sunk in.
Yeah. From a kid's perspective, I thought it was so cool whenever, what was it? Basically something that my parents taught me, don't do that, that's a bad thing. And then my parents did it kind of absentmindedly, and I went, Dad, you're not supposed to do that. And my dad goes through 5 different emotions at once of, what's this kid telling me to do? And then he realizes, wait a minute, I taught him that. Yes, you're right, son. We're not supposed to do that. I'm sorry, I was wrong, but he's so excited because yes, he gets it. Oops, I messed up, but also good. Yes, my son has corrected my behavior because I corrected his behavior. Woo! Yes, that's what's going on between Jesus and Martha. And how is Martha's faith rewarded? Of course, the raising of Lazarus isn't because Martha said these things. Jesus had already set on the path to bring Lazarus back. But Martha's faith, Martha's declaration that you are the Son of God, and whatever you ask of God, he will give you. He gets to tell Martha, no, your brother's coming back right now. And he asks her, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives in me and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And she says, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." Folks, those are the words we hear before people are baptized. Those are the words we hear when lives are being changed. And here's Martha, just lost her brother, seeing the person who has said that he will rise again. And she says, "Yes, Lord, you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is come into the world." And it's after this that Jesus calls out to Lazarus and he walks himself out of the tomb. This is faith incarnate. That she learned from a person who claimed to be the Son of God, who was fulfilling all of these prophecies and teaching and doing miracles in such a way. And even those who saw the miracles and learned from Jesus directly sometimes doubted him, sometimes had hiccups. But Martha, she was on board 100%. Any other thoughts before we move on to our last little bit here? Yeah.
I think about Martha. She got the message, whether she was in the kitchen listening or whatever. At some point, she got the message. And at this point, it's Mary that stays in the house and Martha that comes out.
Yeah. You know, there's lots of differentiation between Mary's responses to Jesus' teaching are very emotional. And Martha's reactions to Jesus' teaching and following are very logical, are very, I don't know, not thought through isn't the best term for that, but here we're seeing that is that, yeah, we don't know specifically why Mary is still in the home, but yeah, we're seeing that there is two reactions to the teaching, to Jesus' presence, and yet neither of them are wrong, but one is the more focused reaction. And so, yeah, here we see Martha addresses the problem at hand very directly. Yeah, good point. Any other thoughts before we move on? Yeah.
I think it's interesting too that Mary said the same thing to him when she saw him. If you'd have been here, my brother would have died.
Yeah.
So,
All right, so our last main chunk this morning is going to be just over in chapter 12. In chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. Then, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and had the money box, and he had used to take what was put in it. But Jesus said, "Let her alone, she has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always." So, here we are back in Bethany, and we get that specification again. Bethany, where Lazarus was who had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There's a lot of do's and beggars, but the point is, that's where Lazarus and Mary and Martha were from, was the town of Bethany. And we know that Bethany was about a couple miles away from Jerusalem. So this was not a super far jaunt. But while they were there, it says that Lazarus sitting at the table with them, again, the person who had been raised from the dead, just casually lounging with Jesus. To Jesus, this is not a big deal, but to anyone viewing there, they would have heard about the man raised from the dead. And again, there would have been lots of questioning, lots of doubts of, oh, was he actually ever really dead? Yeah, he was in the tomb 4 days. oh, but like, is he actually still up and walking around, or was it whole like a setup for, no, look, he's still here. This is much later now, and the guy is up and walking around and sitting and having a meal with the Lord, with Jesus. And so as this is going on, Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard. I don't know what spikenard is, but just from the name alone, it sounds interesting. Yeah.
You can take a test whiff of spikenard at the community pharmacy. It used to be down off of State Street. And I think they moved over here on Fair Oaks or something now. But they have all kinds of those, like, not spices, but oils.
Yeah.
So, and it's expensive. It was like $26 for this tiny little bottle. And I went in there years ago when we studied this and took a sniff of it. They have like a tester. And it smelled like a wet, sweet cave. That's my summary of spikenard.
Yeah, no. Interesting. But anyway, yeah, she took this, $26 today. We talked about 300 denarii back then. This was not like, oh, we can make a bit of money off of it. This was like, this is a good chunk of change that could make a big difference. But the money is not the importance here, is it? Because, Judas brings up a valid point, heavy quotations. Well, we could have sold this and given it to the poor. Really, Judas? Have you been giving some of our money to the poor recently? No, John specifically mentions that. No, he didn't say that because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and he had the money box and he used to take what was put in it. So yeah, we could have sold that and put it into the money box where I would make sure it was well distributed. But that's not the importance. It was not the money. That this was the lead up to the crucifixion. That there were things that had to be done, that had to be fulfilled, and that Mary saw the importance of this time. And didn't just anoint his feet and then, massage it in with her hands, which would have been, pretty standard practice at that point. No. She gave of herself. She used her hair to wash Jesus' feet. That this would have been, I don't want to use the word dramatic, would have been a very poignant, a very memorable use of this oil. It wasn't just someone is wanting Jesus to smell good and his feet to be well oiled, but this is showing that she is giving herself to the Lord. She's not just giving a little bit of herself. She's not just going through the motions, making sure things are done. She is giving all of herself. That every bit of Mary is going in service to the Lord. And Jesus said, let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. This makes us think that Mary didn't just grab the first thing off the shelf and go and anoint the feet of Jesus. She heard what Jesus said. She learned about the day of crucifixion, that this was something that was going to happen. And she kept this stored away so that when the time came, that she would be a part of this. And that's how our faith should be. It should not be, oh, let's grab the most convenient thing that's on the shelf and now that's part of our faith. No. We have to plan it out. We have to make sure that what we do is intentional. That when the time comes, we are ready. As a modern Christian, that thing we get to look towards is the second coming. But we don't know what day it is. So how do you be prepared for something that you don't know is coming? You prepare those around you to be ready for that day also. Which means there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of wanting to make sure that everyone knows this as quickly as possible. But also making sure that as many people are ready as humanly possible. Jesus said, go out and make disciples of all nations. We can't be just concerned about the little area around us. We should very much be concerned about the little area around us. Sometimes we get too caught up in making sure that our efforts go far and wide, and sometimes we neglect the little area around us. But the entire point is there's no borders to where the word reaches. That it goes all the way around the globe. And so just making sure that what you're doing, that how you serve Jesus, how you serve the Lord is intentional. It's not convenient. It's not the first thing that we snag. It's that we've set things out so that when the time comes, we know exactly what to do and we know exactly how to do it. Any other thoughts about that? Yep.
It was interesting, you know, the counterposition between Mary and Judas, that he was there, he listened, but somehow he didn't understand until it was too late.
Yeah.
Until he got his 30 pieces of silver and then realized he was guilty.
Mhm.
And then did something wrong again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something probably similar to what you just said, but something that's always kind of, I don't know if you'd say bothered me, but it's always been on my mind is people who rely on something like a deathbed confession to become a member of God's family. And all along, they knew what they should be doing, never did it, and just relied on the fact that I don't need to mess with all that stuff for now. I can do it at the last minute, and everything will be fine. I'm not saying it's not gonna happen that way, but it's just kind of always been on my mind is whether or not that would be a valid thought.
Yeah. And I think the kicker in that whole thing is that they're keeping that in their back, they're keeping that in their back pocket.
Right.
That it's not the forefront of their focus, it's just, oh, that's my fallback plan.
Right.
That's, oops, death is a lot scarier than I thought it was, and I sure would not like to go to the other place. So yeah, now this is something that I'll throw myself into. There are people that genuinely come to be in the Lord's church much later in life due to one thing or another, but it's not the, I've been holding off on this until the very, very last point so that I didn't have to change my ways now. We don't believe that the water that we baptize with is actually holy water. We don't believe the water is somehow blessed in a certain way whenever a certain person touches it. The whole point of baptism, of being fully immersed, is that it's what's in here, and it's what's in here. And yeah, in the same way, our belief has to be intentional. If we hear what we're supposed to do, but then ignore it because, oh, I can just come around at the very last minute, like you said. That's intentionally ignoring the word of the Lord. Yeah.
Me and my big mind. But anyway, why would you deny yourself the joy that a Christian gets to live while they're on this earth? You know, why fill it with bad things when you can have the joy and the comfort that comes with being a Christian?
Yep. You genuinely miss out. Last little thing here is that we talk about how when Jesus appeared to the apostles, you know, Thomas initially doubted, he wanted to see the proof. A lot of, you know, they were a bit slow to get to the tomb. We know that there were multiple Marys, Mary Magdalene, Mary and Martha, but that whenever the time came for the resurrection, they weren't slow to get up and, oh, maybe it's time to see Jesus. They ran. The women were there when the angel appeared. And when Jesus first came. So that just shows you, Mary and Martha were never anything less than 100% committed to what he taught. Because they were the first ones to see him. So yeah, have intentional faith like Mary and Martha. And as always, stand for what is good. Stand for what is true. Not less bad, stand for what is good. Thank you. Thanks for a great class, y'all.
Oh, you